What is up, it's Figure Hunter, and today we're going to talk about why I sold my Apple Watch Ultra and what I think about the Apple Watch Series 9 and the Apple Watch Ultra 2 Black, and coupled with that, what I think about Apple as a company and some of their other product issues I have, as well as where I think Apple stands in the sports and training landscape today as somebody who trains and tests devices. I don't have any devices. We're not going to look at any devices. This is just sort of a thoughts review. If you're new to the channel, I just test devices for higher intensity interval training and recovery and wellness, and primarily those types of things, but also looking at like the latest technology and smartwatch features alongside the training at the sort of primary tenet. So getting into each of those spectrums, we're going to talk about first, what do I think about the Apple Watch Series 10 and the Apple Watch Ultra 2 Black Edition. We're going to look at what's new, or just talk simply in simple terms, because I'm not going to get the laundry list out of what's new, and then talk about what I think about what's new, specifically the hardware editions, the software editions with training load, and the Vitals. All right, so looking at the Apple Watch Series 10 and the Apple Watch Ultra 2, you basically have a short list of hardware features. You have, it's thinner. This is specifically with the Apple Watch Series 10. It's thinner, has a wider, bigger screen, has a little bit, I don't know that it's gotten even more durability. There's supposed to be a new sleep apnea. I guess that's more on the software side, but sleep apnea tracking. It basically adds the perceived load, training load type tracking with iOS 11, as well as the new Vitals tracking. Tides app side is supposed to be getting a little bit better. And then on the old sort of ongoing issues with either of the series, namely the Apple Watch Series 10, but also coupled with it, you have the same battery lives. So no addition, no extension. It's so funny to hear reviewers saying the same 18 hours, the same long 18-hour battery life, and that's not long. And everybody on planet Earth knows that the frustrating thing, and the one thing that everybody dislikes about the Apple Watch series, on especially the regular series side, which would apply to the Series 10, is nobody likes this short battery life. And everything else, you know, is basically feature-wise the same, other than the addition. Well, again, I'm probably simplifying some missing things. It's just thinner and a little bit bigger display. Obviously, there's new sizing options. There's a new band that you can look at either for the Apple Watch Ultra or for the Series 10. It's got a fancy clasp to it. And then the software features, which we'll talk about, what I think about those things. So in summary, what do I think of the new release of the Apple Watch Series 10 and the Apple Watch Ultra 2 Black? I think it's totally pathetic. The reason I'm not going to test it, the reason I have lost, I mean, I had always sort of felt like, you know, iffy as far as Apple on a comprehensive training watch, obviously, but just in general, I just think this is pathetic. Like this is not a good release. This is lacking significant innovation, significant development in a world that is getting more and more competitive, more and more extensive on the analytics, the analysis, the recovery features, the aspects like that. Apple just continues to be just weak. I don't know, I guess just pathetic. And you can accomplish some things with third-party apps, but you can't accomplish everything with third-party apps. And a lot of those third-party apps are small little companies trying to make the Apple Watch more useful in some division and aspect. So that's what I think of the Apple Watch Series 10 release, as well as the Apple Watch Ultra 2 Black. I just think it's shockingly pathetic. Now, looking at the subsets, not just looking at the hardware, looking at the subsets of some of the expansion of Wear OS 10 or 11 on training load and the Vitals. What do I think about that? Now, the training load, as somebody who tests and tracks devices for training specifically, I think the training load is something, but it's pathetic. I just think it's pathetic. I think it really, in a strong sense, lacks guts for sports science. If you actually look at the training load, a lot of times it's really a training load by perceived training exertion. So you are really evaluating yourself. There's no sports science. It's not telling you like, you know, this is what sports science would tell you about your load relative to past loads. For the most part, it's based on what you tell it you felt like that workout was and what you told it you felt like the past few workouts were. And otherwise, it just most often categorizes it as a 7. Can they develop it? Sure. Have they maybe developed it even since that I took it through a round of testing? Sure. All those things are possible. You don't get a score. Again, it's just lacking any kind of guts for sports science. You don't get any analytics. You just get a chart and you just get your perceived exertion level and it flows through. And if you feel like it, you know, you want to adjust your perceived exertion, you can. And maybe that has value in some categories where you worked harder doing a lot of back squats and your heart rate didn't reflect a certain score. But either way, it's just lacking. It's, you know, it's like Apple does the pretty charts. It looks like a pretty chart. It looks like it has value. But when you think about it, in my opinion, in my experience, in my use, it just didn't provide any significant value. It felt very subjective based. When you're going to a device for training recommendation, training perceptions and training thoughts, you don't necessarily want to rely on yourself. I just think that's a faulty baseline in a lot of ways. A lot of times the trend line or the evaluation is just simply like the calculation of effort times duration, like heart rate times the length of time, which, you know, maybe could be said of other devices having the same approach, but it's just how much of it is a subjective calculation is a little bit uncertain, mostly how you felt about the workout itself and just the fact that it's non-numeric. So that's training load. Now, what do I think of Vitals? I think Vitals is slightly pathetic. So not as pathetic as everything else, like the hardware releases for the Apple Watch Series 10, the Apple Watch Ultra 2 Black. Not as pathetic as quite the training load release. It's got some merit, but it's just not enough, especially in today's landscape. I just think it's kind of like actually pathetic, maybe not just slightly pathetic. But why is it just slightly pathetic? It definitely takes into 5 metrics every night when you go to sleep. And those 5 metrics, I feel like all have value. You know, the different things it looks at, I feel like are things to watch and signs of when you may develop a sickness or when you may be overly burdened. But it is all lacking one significant physiological component, which is heart rate variability tracking. Heart rate variability tracking can be a much bigger indication of recovery, wellness, readiness, or sickness, onset sickness. Your temperature, resting heart rate, those are also indicators, but not as physiologically forceful, powerful, or useful as heart rate variability. And the Apple Watch does not natively or really truly take heart rate variability measurements at any level. It has a component of there you could see in data in Apple Health, but out of the box it takes it every couple of hours, and that's not enough. And even if you tweak some features, you can get it every 15 minutes. That's not enough. It's really not even, they're not even claiming to accurately or truly take heart rate variability measurements. So the Vitals things that it shows are good to look at. And I look at those same Vitals every morning as a multitude of different things. But I think in the real world, in today's world, it just feels so lacking compared to all the other companies that are tracking all those Vitals and culminating them together in readiness scores. Everybody on the planet is trying to take Vitals information, take these tidbits of information and give you some feedback or some recommendations. And that's not what Apple's doing. It can tell you when you have an outlier, but as other reviewers have uncovered, you may have some significant outliers and it's not flashing red. It's just like, yeah, you got one outlier, you got 2 hours of sleep versus the normal 7 hours of sleep. That's probably not so great. And so the primary thing with the bedrock problem with Apple, besides that everything is so soft, is that you can't accomplish with a third-party app the absence of the watch taking heart rate variability measurements. You can't make it take heart rate variability measurements. It's not claiming to, and they don't do it. And I just am shocked they did not come out with their own readiness score. Maybe it's coming, maybe it's down the road, maybe it's around the bend, maybe it's just in hiding and they're gonna release it. And as I share in my second part of this video, like what I think about Apple in general, I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, it's got the same, hey, what's the battery life for the Apple Watch Series 10? Is it 3.5 days? No, it's the same 18-hour battery life. Same thing they've been doing, and that's what I think is the problem, is they've added some additions, but they're all sort of soft additions. Nothing, I don't think, that's deep enough, significant enough, or competitive enough in the world today compared to all the millions of other watches that we'll talk about in part 3 of this video. Now, what do I think about Apple as a company as they've developed in general? I only compare it to my use with the iPhone. You know, I use the iPhone for everything, and I am constantly feeling like the basic tenets of what the iPhone is capable of are getting worse. So whatever they're developing, whatever newness, however like things talk to each other or what tweaks to appearance, I feel like the basic bedrock meat and potato stuff that Apple does that I use are worsening, not improving, not getting better. If I just take the simple voice to text, it's unbelievably frustrating that they are getting what feels like much worse in voice to text accuracy and how it handles voice to text. You know, in just simple forms, I just think, well, that's just one little tweak, that's one thing. But no, it's a bigger problem of a company that's poorly developing, in my opinion. Because if you think, like, when I go to, you know, speak to a text message, it now regularly switches common words for random people's names. I said one the other day, and it typed in Juan, W-A-U-N, not even somebody that's in my contact book. It often substitutes people's names for in ways that don't even make sense. Sometimes recommendations would be for people I haven't talked to in months. It just on the, you know, sending something. It's just worse. It's just dumber. And then I've got the iPhone 15. It just feels like it's dumber. If you have your orientation lock off and you go to rotate your phone while you're doing a voice text, it always messes it up. Like, can't handle that. Can't rotate your phone in the middle. We can't keep listening. No way. Which to me, I just feel like, quit looking at AI. And number one, they're like so far behind on AI, it's unbelievable to me. And it's, you know, end of September, beginning of October 2024. But it's just worse. Fix the things that are just like basically worse. I have some names that are all caps from like an old migration of contacts. Some names that are in all caps. So like I'll have one name, let's just say it's John. And I say I'm gonna type something to John. I say like, you know, how's John doing in a text message? I'll have 500 John contacts in regular, and it'll only put the John with all caps. It'll like think that even those 500 contacts in my list that have regular, you know, capital first letter, rest, it like, that's so stupid. It's so stupid, it's so basic. But in general, and I think I mean, I don't know everything about AI and how they're developing and what their new artificial intelligence is going to be like. I just think they're so far behind the mark. But at the same time, they don't do the basic things that they have been doing has been getting worse, not better. Like it should just get the bedrock things more accurate rather than less accurate. So in general, that's how I feel about Apple as a company. I feel like they're getting less quality, less accurate, even as they maybe are developing some new fancy special technology. The day-to-day use is getting worse for me. So last, what do I think about Apple, the Apple Watch Series 10, Apple Watch Ultra in the competitive landscape of training and, you know, training devices, sports devices, Coros, Polar, Garmin, you know, even the Samsung Galaxy Watch Ultra, Huawei. I just think they severely lack innovation. The fact that HRV is missing in a sea of watches that take HRV measurements and use that to provide physiological feedback just means Apple is dead to me in some ways. It just, you know, they're dead in the competition ways. If you think of like true sports and training watches where you want to get physiological feedback on your recovery, your sleep, your other, you know, your HRV, it's relatively dead. And when I look at the others, so Coros, nightly HRV, wealth of training analytics. With each workout, you can do aerobic and anaerobic training, recovery time, training load over time. You can get, you know, all sorts of like training feedback Polar gives you more simplified training feedback just in a rigor score, cardio load score for a workout, and then tracking that to see your training load over time. But they do a great job at nightly analysis, analyzing different components of your autonomic nervous system, as well as sleep analysis to give you one primary score, but it's a coupling of 2 scores so you can see where it came from. And then you have Garmin, you know, it's back to the Samsung Galaxy Watch Ultra. They have a readiness score, you know, Google Pixel readiness scores based on HRV, based on all these other components, like these other vitals that Apple's taking. And then Garmin's the industry leader. Garmin has more things than everybody, but Garmin also does unique, so they have like all the recovery aspects and then all the training aspects. And what they do really well, I think, on top is they have a lot of dedicated specialized sports profiles. So if you're doing paddleboarding, you get actually stroke rates. If you're doing indoor rowing, you can track, you know, statistics with that particular cardio metric. And I know Apple has some of those things tied in a little bit, but a lot of times just a laundry list of, you know, sports profiles that track your calories and your heart rate. So Garmin leads the whole kabang, or whatever word that would be. And so that's my feelings on Apple and the competitive landscape of other sports watches that help you assess, evaluate your training intensity, your training rigor, your training potential, as well as your recovery potential, your wellness features of just your nightly sleep, but also how your training bleeds into the needed recovery, and are you recovered, and all that sort of ties together with a big bow on it. Apple is just so pathetic. You know, it's you know, you can use third-party apps. Our third-party apps are great. Again, those are small ARPFIT apps, so there's the ability to develop. Some of the sports science is going to be limited, but they're always going to be limited on the recovery side because Apple doesn't take all the primary physiological metrics needed to provide true comprehensive recovery feedback. Not out of the gate, not unless you know, tweak and do different things. So those are my thoughts on the new release for the Apple Watch Series 10 and the Apple Watch Ultra 2 Black Series. That's my thoughts on Apple as a company, and that's my thoughts on Apple as a competitor in the sports and training watch industry. It's the Figure Hunter. Thanks so much for watching.